Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy. But we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. The first item of business is general questions, and at question number 1, I call Patrick Harvie.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Government what discussions the Culture Secretary has had with the Music Venues Trust regarding the introduction of a ticket levy, whether on a voluntary or statutory basis, for stadium and arena shows to support grassroots culture venues?
Cabinet Secretary Angus Robertson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thank you to Patrick Harvie for his question. The Scottish Government fully values the importance of the music industry to Scotland's culture and the role venues play in the talent pipeline. I met with the Music Venue Trust in May to discuss the difficulties faced by the industry at a grassroots level and the proposal for a ticket levy to alleviate these and help build a sustainable live music ecosystem. The Scottish Government is keen to continue to engage with the industry to support sector-led initiatives.
Patrick Harvie.
I'm pleased that the Cabinet Secretary has met with the Music Venues Trust. I'm not quite clear if he's expressed a view on the basic policy yet, but this summer, as he'll know, we've seen huge stadium performances in Scotland from the likes of Taylor Swift, Foo Fighters and Pink, and the Music Venues Trust show the introduction of a levy, which has already been done in countries like France, for example, could raise well over £1 million a year to support the sector during a very, very difficult time. And the Cabinet Secretary, I'm sure, is well aware of the cultural importance of independent venues, which aren't necessarily charitable. Some of them are commercial.
Question, please, Mr.
Some of them
Harvie.
are funded, some of them are not. This would be a really powerful measure of supporting those venues that are integral to the culture of our towns and cities.
Thank you. Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I agree with Patrick Harvie about the importance to agree to support venues. This was an issue that I raised with my Culture Secretary opposite number in the last UK Government, and it is one that I will raise with Lisa Nandy of the new incoming UK Government. I think Patrick Harvie will appreciate that this proposal involves significant reserved powers. These are things that I'm keen to better understand about their deliverability, and it is part of a dialogue that I look forward to continuing to have with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport in the UK Government.
Supplementary, George Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Despite the financial implications of the new Labour Government's financial decisions, it is welcome that the SNP Scottish Government is still increasing funding to the culture sector by almost £16 million in this financial year to £196.6 million. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline how this funding ensures support for culture venues throughout Scotland, and obviously the money being sent out by Creative Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, the additional £15.8 million in culture funding this financial year is the first stage in our commitment to £100 million more per year for culture funding by 2028-2029. And the additional funding this financial year includes £13.2 million for Creative Scotland, and this has been used to support their network of regularly funded organisations, including the Scottish Music Industry Association, as well as providing additional funding towards the Creative Scotland Open Fund for individuals and additional support to Screen Scotland.
Question number 2, James Dornan.
To ask the Scottish Government how its investment in Fairer Futures partnerships will help to tackle child poverty.
Cabinet Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville.
Through our investment in expanding our Fairer Futures partnership, we will work with local authorities to help families get the support that matters to them, focusing on family well-being, income maximisation and support towards education and sustained employment. This includes a range of services working together across childcare, education, health and social care, housing and employment, the third sector and beyond. This work will develop practical examples and tools to support more effective service delivery that can be used to tackle child poverty across Scotland.
James Dornan.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for her answer. Before I go on to my supplementary, with the indulgence of the Chamber, if you wouldn't mind me just mentioning the passing of Councillor Kenny McLean, who was a councillor when I was the leader of Glasgow City Council, who was a hard worker for his constituents in his ward in Partick East. He was tireless in working for Glasgow, and he was a huge supporter of making Scotland a better place through independence. But more importantly, he was a great man. He will be sadly missed by his family and everybody who knew him. Thank you. With devolved finances tighter than ever as a result of the UK Government's decision, how does the Cabinet Secretary anticipate Fairer Futures partnerships will help to laser focus Scotland's constrained resources and public services on the mission to eradicate child poverty?
Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you. And can I begin by associating myself with remarks James Dornan made around Councillor McLean. He and I were parliamentary researchers in the first intake in 1999, and I remember him fondly, and his words of wisdom will be greatly missed by myself and others. But in relation to the question that, despite facing the most challenging financial circumstances since devolution, we are determined to drive forward the national mission to end child poverty, and that investment in our Fairer Futures partnership will provide a driver to enable local authorities to test and improve how they deliver services, and thus better supporting families. That development of practical examples and tools can therefore be shared much more widely than even just with the partnership organisations that we're taking part in. I think it's a very important part of our public service reform programme.
Question number 3, Oliver Mundell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what steps it's taking to improve access to GP appointments.
Cabinet Secretary Neil Gray.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Last November, the Scottish Government published the General Practice Access Principles. This report sets out a clear framework for the core principles of how GP services should be delivered equitably, sensitively, reasonably and appropriately, making the most effective use of resources and systems currently available. We continue to work together with all relevant partners to effectively implement these principles, including through our commitment to the ongoing recruitment of primary care multidisciplinary teams, as well as 800 more GPs. Healthcare Improvement Scotland has already worked with over 100 general practices to improve access arrangements.
Oliver Mundell.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer, but the current situation remains a disgrace. And the increased move to same-day only appointments rationed at ATM simply doesn't work for the elderly, disabled or those with young children. The latest in the long line of complaints I've had from a constituent includes an elderly couple in Dumfries, and they'll probably give me a clip round the ear for saying that next time I see them, who tried on 4 occasions to get a doctor's appointment. Day 1, a permanent engaged tone at appointment time, unable to speak to a human voice. Yep. Day 2, same again, permanent engaged tone. Day 3, 10 minutes in a queue to get to the front, human voice, but no doctors available. Only on the 4th day, when they then decided to complain to the practice, did they get an appointment. Does the Cabinet Secretary think that's acceptable?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Oliver Mundell for that question, and what he narrates is clearly not acceptable, and I would believe that we should see access to GPs improving. I think we are seeing an increase of demand upon our primary care services, and GPs are managing more complex cases and are so under pressure as a result. But obviously it's the responsibility of individual practices to ensure that they have an appointment system that works not just for them but for their patients, most importantly. So I'd be keen to hear more about Oliver Mundell's case, so that can be brought up and indeed looked into by the Health Board as to whether or not they're fulfilling the merits of the GP contract.
Brief supplementary, Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government General Practice Access Principles state GP practices should use digital resources where appropriate and when people choose to meet their needs. Deaf people or those with anxiety may find it more difficult to book appointments over the phone, and services such as Near Me are not available everywhere. Can the Cabinet Secretary advise if the Scottish Government has further plans to support GPs in adopting digital infrastructure where they are not able to provide these services?
Secretary.
Thank you. I thank Faisal Chowdhury for narrating what is a complex picture in terms of how people choose to access their health services, in this case primary care services. And he's right that there are digital solutions available for some people who are able to use that. But I'm very clear that that won't work for everybody, as Faisal Chowdhury has set out. So we are supporting, and I would want to see more support for practices to be able to invest in not just the access requirements that I've set out to Oliver Mundell, but also the digital services where that's possible, and we'll continue to support boards to do just that.
Question number 4, Maurice Golden.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to concerns over its reported plans to downgrade the neonatal intensive care unit at Ninewells Hospital.
Minister Jenny Minto.
Under the new model of neonatal care announced in July 2023, neonatal intensive care will be provided in a smaller number of units with co-located specialist services. This model is based on evidence and clinical advice from neonatal experts, which shows that the most preterm and sickest babies have a better chance of survival when they are cared for in high-volume specialist neonatal units. These specialist intensive care units will be in the Queen Elizabeth University Hospital, Edinburgh Royal Infirmary and Aberdeen Maternity Hospital. Local neonatal units will continue to deliver care to babies who need it, including a level of intensive care, and these changes will only affect a small number of the smallest and sickest babies.
Maurice Golden.
I thank the Minister for that answer, but there was little, if any, mention in the report of the potential impact on the mental well-being of families forced to travel far from their home during what is already a harrowing time for them. It's unacceptable. So does the Minister agree there should be a fuller assessment before taking any action?
Minister.
I thank Maurice Golden for his question and absolutely recognise the traumatic time it must be for new parents in these circumstances. This model of neonatal care is supported by a range of stakeholders and clinicians, and we have consulted through BLIS and also with a wider cohort of families as well. This work is ongoing. We have had a number of reports that have, a report that is now being led by the regional clinical leads looking at the implementation, and of course the mental health and support of families is very much at the centre of the work.
Brief supplementary, Willie Rennie.
This doesn't just affect my constituents who use Ninewells, but also Victoria and Kirkcaldy. I would want the best care. I would want to be able to access the best care for my family. But my concern is that ever greater specialism leads to ever greater centralisation, leads to de-skilling in regional facilities. So how does the Minister make the judgment about when specialism is enough, when centralisation is enough, and that we need to hold up the skills within the regional centres so that everybody can get access to the best care in their local facility.
Minister.
I thank Willie Rennie for his question, and this is exactly what drives this decision-making, which was led by experts within the neonatal sphere of health services, and also building on international evidence as well. It's incredibly important. The key thing is to ensure the safety, the health of the smallest and sickest babies, and that has been what has been absolutely central to all the work and all the evidence that's been pulled together.
Question number 5, Lorna Slater.
To ask the Scottish Government, in light of the recently published Holyrood Park Strategy Plan, what the timeline is for Historic Environment Scotland to complete its movement strategy and deliver on its 10 objectives for the park.
Cabinet Secretary Angus Robertson.
I thank Lorna Slater for her question. Questions regarding day-to-day operational matters of Historic Environment Scotland, including queries relating to the management of Holyrood Park, are best answered directly by Historic Environment Scotland, and I'll ask Hes to respond directly to the member with a full reply to her question in writing.
Lorna Slater.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Holyrood Park's legislation is decades out of date, and it doesn't align with the Council or Government's climate targets or the City of Edinburgh's mobility plan. Will the Cabinet Secretary look at updating the park's legislation and consider reducing or restricting private car use in Holyrood Park in order to ensure the park is net zero by 2030, as the new strategic plan sets out?
Cabinet Secretary.
I met yesterday with the new Chief Executive of Historic Environment Scotland, Katarina Brown. I'm pleased that we have a shared ambition for Historic Environment Scotland. I'm sure that she and colleagues will have been listening very closely to what Lorna Slater has asked, and I will be raising the issues that she has raised with me, with officials, and I will revert to her in writing, given the supplementary question that she posed to me.
Question number 6 has been withdrawn. Question number 7, Megan Gallagher.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will review its relationship with LGBT Youth Scotland in light of reported allegations regarding safeguarding failings.
Minister Cocab Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would also like to mark the passing of Councillor McLean, who was the councillor within my constituency of Glasgow, Kelvin, and a friend. With regards to the question, I thank Megan Gallagher for her question. The Scottish Government have engaged with LGBT Youth Scotland to determine the facts around the recent media reports, and we have determined that no further action is needed at this stage. I refer the member to LGBT Youth Scotland's recent statement that reinforces how they have strengthened their safeguarding policies over the last 5 years to ensure they are in line with the legislation and also meet national standards. The organisation continues to review their safeguarding policies annually to ensure they are as comprehensive as possible.
Megan Gallagher.
Children in Need, who awarded LGBT Youth Scotland £181,000 over the last 5 years, have decided to withdraw their funding. The BBC said its charity had immediately suspended the grant after conducting a thorough review in response to concerns that's been raised by the BBC and others. This comes after the Mail published a damning investigation of LGBT Youth Scotland, where former Chief Executive James Rennie was jailed for horrific child sex assaults after he was unmasked as a member of one of Britain's worst ever paedophile rings. I've raised concerns about LGBT Youth Scotland in this very chamber, the guidance they provide to and the guidance that they provide to children and young people regarding safeguarding. Yet another scandal has now emerged that convicted paedophile Andrew Easton co-authored a guidance with LGBT Youth Scotland on coming out as transgender for children as young as 13. So, if there's no further case to be answered, Minister, why have these safeguarding failings taken place in the first place? Why is Children in Need removed their funding? And why is the Scottish Government not agreeing to conducting, at the very least, a review into LGBT Youth Scotland regarding what's happened in recent times?
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The member has raised several points which I am not able to answer in such a short time. However, I would be happy to put further comments in writing. However, we are committed to advancing equality and supporting LGBTQI and young people, including through funding of LGBT Youth Scotland. This is particularly important at a time when we are seeing a rise in attacks against the LGBTQI community. I would also like to point out that LGBT Youth Scotland are not under any criminal investigation. Recent media reports related to a convicted individual who was a young person when he attended the charity in 2009, but was not a volunteer or a paid employee.
Thank you. Brief supplementary. Emma Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's so important that children and young people have somewhere that they can go to expect care, safety and advice, even if, sadly, that is not at home. What is the Scottish Government doing to support LGBTQ young people and ensure that they grow up feeling supported?
Minister.
I thank Emma Roddick for that answer and for the opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to doing everything we can to make sure that Scotland is the best place to grow up for LGBTQI plus young people. This is particularly important, as I said, as we are seeing a rise in attacks against that community. We are providing £290,870 worth of funding to LGBT Youth Scotland for 2024-25 through our Equality and Human Rights Fund to deliver a range of projects to support LGBTQI plus young people. We've also made significant progress in embedding LGBTQI plus inclusive education across the curriculum rather than in specific LGBTQI plus lessons to improve the learning environment for all children and young people.
Thank you. Question number 8, Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on the implementation of the recommendations from the National Review of Eating Disorder Services.
Minister Marie Todd.
The Scottish Government is committed to implementing the recommendations of the National Review of Eating Disorder Services. We've established the National Eating Disorder Network, which is supporting us to deliver on the medium and long-term recommendations. Additionally, we've established an Eating Disorder Lived Experience panel to support the work of the network. The National Specification for Care and Treatment of Eating Disorders in Scotland, which outlines the national standards of service that anyone impacted by eating disorders can expect from services, will be published this year.
Kevin Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Minister for that answer. Could the Minister please outline what action the National Eating Disorder Network is taking to improve training, national level service development, setting quality standards and coordinating research and innovation networks for eating disorders?
Minister.
The National Eating Disorder Network is working with NHS Education Scotland to ensure accessibility of training for all and to raise awareness of available training. The network has scheduled regional meetings for clinicians to discuss challenges, share successes, highlight improvement activity and explore opportunities to work regionally to improve consistency of access. A series of webinars offered by the network will focus on research and innovation in Scotland and the UK, offering insights on practical implementation, whilst the network will also consider how to tackle gaps in research. Finally, the network will work closely with boards to support implementation of the national specification.
Thank you. That concludes general questions. The next item of business is First Minister's questions, and at question number 1, I call Douglas Ross.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and can I remind the Chamber of my register of members' interests? My wife is a sergeant with Police Scotland. November will mark 20 years since Alistair Wilson was murdered on the doorstep of his home in Nairn. For 2 decades, the killer has never been caught. Alistair's family have spoken with the Press and Journal and raised serious concerns about Police Scotland and Chief Constable Joe Farrell. Andrew Wilson was 4 when his father was murdered, and this week he said this: "We question why our family is still being kept in the dark while Joe Farrell is basking in the media spotlight as she talks of building bridges and providing confidence to our family." Andrew continued, "We don't know whether Joe Farrell has been confused or perhaps even caught in a lie. but she has certainly failed to reassure us that she has a grip on the worsening situation. Alistair Wilson's family described the conduct of the Chief Constable as insulting and callous. So does the First Minister agree with the family of Alistair Wilson?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, this is obviously an incredibly sensitive case, and the first thing I want to say is to express my sympathy to the Wilson family at the tragedy they suffered almost 20 years ago, and to share their frustration that this case has not been resolved. Mr Ross will know that there has been extensive intervention and investigation to try to identify who was responsible for the murder of Alistair Wilson, and I welcome very much the fact that the Lord Advocate, who is Mr Ross again will understand is the independent head of the prosecution service, has instructed that a fresh investigation be undertaken of this case. The point that Mr Ross puts to me about the actions of the Chief Constable, again, Mr Ross will appreciate that the police operate with absolute operational independence from the government. It would be inappropriate of me to indicate any opinion on the stance taken by the Chief Constable. It is a matter for the Chief Constable to address, and certainly the First Minister should not be indicating to the Chief Constable what actions she should take in relation to a live investigation.
Douglas Ross.
My question, because I know the situation very well, my question was not asking about the live police investigation. It's asking about the comments of a family this week, a family still grieving the loss in horrific circumstances. And the response from Police Scotland, following the decision by the Lord Advocate, is one that clearly falls below any standard we should expect, particularly from the Chief Constable of Police Scotland. So I hope the First Minister will at least reflect on that language. Insulting and callous. The Chief Constable is being described by a grieving family as callous, and I hope the First Minister will reflect on that and seek to address what could happen, because this case has been unsolved for 2 decades, but it's also spanned several Chief Constables and several government ministers. The Wilson family have raised concerns about the current Chief Constable's handling of the case, but the Scottish Government are not powerless in this situation. Indeed, the First Minister has previously spoken about ongoing police investigations in his own constituency. So can I ask the First Minister if he or his Justice Secretary have spoken with the family of Alistair Wilson about their significant concerns, and if so, what has been done to address these?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I don't want in any way to create any sense that I am not sympathetic and empathetic to the situation in which the Wilson family find themselves. Alistair Wilson was murdered on his own doorstep. His killers have not been brought to justice, and that deeply concerns me. I think it is important that I place on the record that Police Scotland have had formidable success in resolving cases of murder, some of them long in the past, because of the improvement in investigative procedures and practices, and that has resulted in a number of people being brought to justice who had remained with freedom, having been committed some of the worst crimes imaginable in our society. So Police Scotland does focus on resolving these matters, and that's why I said in my first answer that I welcome the instruction from the Lord Advocate for a further investigation of this case. Now, neither I nor the Justice Secretary have spoken to the Wilson family about their concerns, and I think it's Mr Ross raises the fact that I've expressed points in relation to previous cases in my own constituency. I did that respectfully when I was on the backbenches. I was not First Minister. It's a very different matter when the First Minister starts commenting on live cases, and I think I need to avoid doing that for the sake of protecting the constitutional separation of responsibility for operational matters with Police Scotland. But I would say to Mr Ross, I have every sympathy with the Wilson family. And I hope that the actions that the Lord Advocate is taking, and which have been pursued now by Police Scotland, will provide a resolution to the deep concerns that the family has.
Douglas Ross.
In December last year, the Wilson family complained to the Police Investigation and Review Commissioner about the handling of the police investigation. But looking at this more widely across the country, the current system of police complaints was set up by the SNP government when they centralised Scotland's police forces back in 2013. And as the experience of the Wilson family shows, it's clear that the current system is not fit for purpose. The police bill that's currently before Parliament aims to address these failings, but there are still areas where it falls short. Just yesterday, His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary in Scotland called for an amendment to the bill which would allow officers who face criminal charges to face criminal charges if they abuse their position. I agree with that, and I can confirm that Scottish Conservatives have lodged an amendment which would add this provision to the police bill when it goes to committee next week. So will the First Minister back the Inspector's calls and support our Scottish Conservative amendment to ensure that any police officers who abuse their position are held to account?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, I have a great deal of sympathy with the point that Mr Ross has raised with me today, and Ministers will look carefully at the amendment that comes forward for Stage 2, because part of the purpose of the Police Ethics, Conduct and Scrutiny Bill, which I actually began some scrutiny of when I was on the back benches in the Criminal Justice Committee, is coming to Stage 2 proceedings in Parliament. It's been supported at Stage 2 at Committee. It's been supported by Parliament at Stage 1. The issues that His Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary raised in the proposal have not been the subject of consultation as part of the preparation of the bill. So that's an issue which we have to be mindful of in considering the amendments that come forward, because obviously Parliament does prefer to ensure that issues are the subject of consultation. But having said that, I am sympathetic to the point that Douglas Ross raises, because I do want to ensure that the Police Investigation and Review Commissioner is actually able to undertake the type of functions that I think both Mr Ross and I would want them to undertake. And that has to be effective, it has to be transparent, it has to be challenging. And as the bill takes its passage through Parliament, I give Mr Ross the assurance that Ministers will look carefully and consider carefully any proposals that will work to strengthen that test that I've put to Parliament today.
Douglas Ross.
Because our amendment does strengthen the bill and it does fill a void that even HMIC have recognised. But the truth is, Presiding Officer, that while Police Scotland may have let down the Wilson family, this government have been letting down police officers and the communities they serve right across Scotland. Officer numbers are now at their lowest level here in Scotland for 17 years. The SNP used to promise that they would put 1,000 additional officers on Scotland's streets, but numbers are now down by 1,200 compared to when the SNP created Police Scotland a decade ago. The number of major investigation team DIs, which investigate the most serious crimes, including murders like those of Alistair Wilson, are down by a third. And Police Scotland are so stretched they are no longer able to investigate every crime. Quite frankly, the SNP have left our police to fight crime with one hand tied behind their back, and the results are clear. Violent crime at its highest level in a decade, and our prisons so overwhelmed that SNP ministers have been forced to release prisoners en masse. So can I ask the First Minister, does he agree with his deputy, Kate Forbes, who said that under the SNP, policing has been stretched to breaking point?
First Minister.
I think I have to put on the record the fact that levels of crime in Scotland are currently at 40-year lows. 40-year lows. And that's a tribute to the work of police officers focusing on the tackling of crime in localities. Now, I accept that police numbers have fallen. There's, at the last census at the end of June, they were sitting at 16,207. and that is lower than the government expected, given that we had given the police record funding of £1.55 billion. Now, I expect those numbers to increase, and in the next census for those numbers to increase. So there should be some reassurance to Mr Ross that police numbers are strengthening as a consequence of the significant levels of recruitment that the Chief Constable and Police Scotland are undertaking at the present moment. Now, there is an inherent contradiction in Mr Ross's question to me, that his accusation is that crime is not being pursued, but the prisons are full. Well, if the prisons are full, that suggests to me that crime is being pursued and more individuals are being convicted and imprisoned.
Let's hear the First Minister.
So, I would respectfully say to Mr Ross that there are challenges in relation to the work of Police Scotland. Police Scotland will make the necessary steps to investigate crimes where there is evidence to do so, and that people will be convicted, will be prosecuted where there is a case to do so. That is what we would expect, and that's what we would expect in a system where we have a 40-year low of crime as a consequence of this government's stewardship of police resources in Scotland.
Question number 2, Anna Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Figures published this week have revealed the extent of the homelessness crisis in Scotland. On this SNP government's watch, 40,685 homelessness applications were recorded last year. That is the highest in a decade. And as of March 31st this year, there were almost 32,000 live homelessness applications. Every number is a human being in need of desperate help and support. But this SNP government is failing them. In the face of this homelessness crisis, this Parliament shamed the government into declaring a housing emergency earlier this year. But despite that, the Housing Minister, Paul McLennan, insists this government has a good track record on tackling homelessness, a decade high. So can I ask the First Minister, is there a housing emergency or not?
First Minister.
President Officer, yes, there is a housing emergency. The government recognises that, and the government is taking action to remedy the housing emergency. There is a range of action that is being undertaken to ensure that we improve the position on the availability of accommodation through tackling the issue of voids. There is further work being undertaken to strengthen investment in the delivery, the construction of new homes and the refurbishment of existing homes to be available for rent. And there are steps being taken in the planning system to ensure that we can take the steps to tackle the housing emergency. So the government is absolutely focused on building on its strong record of house construction to tackle the challenges that we face.
Anna Sarwar.
I welcome that the First Minister recognises a housing emergency, but the broader answer demonstrates a government with its head in the sand and oblivious to the struggles of thousands of Scots facing homelessness as we speak. Let's look at the facts. Under this SNP government, we have the lowest levels of home building by housing associations since Thatcher. Overall house building is down by 17%, and the affordable home building target is in tatters. And we now shamefully have record levels of children in temporary accommodation without a home to call their own. That is over 10,000 children left homeless on this government's watch. And the number of young people living in B&Bs has soared in just the last 3 years by over 900%. So, First Minister, with record levels of homelessness and you now agreeing with the declared housing emergency, will you change course or will you back your out-of-touch Housing Minister?
First Minister, I would be grateful, Mr Sarwar, if you could speak through the chair. First Minister.
Mr Sarwar challenges me on the government's record, and he just talked about facts. So allow me to share some facts with Parliament. Between 2007 and 2024, this government was responsible for the construction of an average of 7,750 affordable homes each year. And during that period, we endured the financial crash and 14 years of austerity under the last Conservative government. And of course, we have the prolonging of austerity under the new Labour government. Now, between 1999 and 2007, when Mr Sarwar's party were in charge of the Scottish Government and Jackie Baillie was, for a short period, a minister in that government, the Labour government, when money was so flush that they left money in the Treasury kitty unspent, there was an average of 5,448 affordable homes. Now, just so that everybody hears that clearly, at a time of plenty, when the money couldn't literally be spent in time, an average of 5,448 homes were delivered each year by the Labour Party. Under this government, it's 7,750 homes, so we're getting on with the job.
Yep. Anna Sarwar.
Presiding Officer, the First Minister wants to talk about at a time when I was 16 years old, not a time when 10,000 children are homeless in Scotland right now under this government's watch. And it's the devastating consequence of what he himself admitted was a government too focused on what they can't do than what they can do. Scots left to pay the price for an SNP government that's lost its way, is incompetent in government and is bad with people's money. Housing in Scotland is completely the responsibility of this SNP government, but after 17 years, when will they take responsibility rather than always looking for someone else to blame? For the Housing Minister to claim they have a proven track record on tackling homelessness when it is at record levels is not just inept, it's shameful. So Paul McLennan simply cannot continue. So will the First Minister recognise that he has a choice? Put up with more failure or get to grips with the housing emergency, sack this Housing Minister and change direction?
First Minister.
I would just point out to Parliament that, as usual, Anna Sarwar, when he's faced with facts that rebut his argument, always plays the man and not the issue. It's what Anna Sarwar always does. So let me just come back to the facts. When under this government, and I'm not evading our responsibility, under this government, we have built, on average, 7,750 affordable homes each year, compared to when Mr Sarwar's party were in charge, when the money was so abundant they couldn't actually spend it. They only managed to build 5,448 houses. Now,
let's hear one another.
That says to me that this government is getting on with the job. Now, Mr Sarwar said to me that this area of policy is all under the responsibility of the Scottish Government. And to an extent that is true. Housing policy is our responsibility. But there is a budgetary question here. And let me just point out to Mr Sarwar that our capital budget, which is what builds affordable homes, is facing a cut of near 9% under the current spending plans of the last Conservative government and the incoming Labour government that they're going to carry on with. Our financial transactions budget has been cut by a whopping 62%. Now, I have raised with the Chancellor of the Exchequer and with the Deputy Prime Minister the absolute total stupidity and folly of presiding over a 62% cut in the financial transactions budget. So if Mr Sarwar would like to help Scotland in any way, shape or form, why doesn't he persuade the UK Labour government to desert the Tory agenda and to start investing in our country?
Thank you. Question number 3, Lorna Slater.
This week is Climate Week. The Climate Change Committee tells us that we urgently need to decarbonise transport, getting people out of cars and planes and onto buses, trains and their own feet and wheels. The Scottish Government's pilot to abolish peak rail fares, which was championed by the Scottish Greens in government, ends this week, hiking up the prices of train fares for many workers and students who don't have any choice about when they travel. Is this the right message for the Scottish Government to be sending in Climate Week?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Government has invested in the pilot exercise. It was due to run for a 6-month period. We extended it for a further 6 months, so there's been a year-long pilot to determine if this was an effective way to deliver the modal shift, which I agree with Lorna Slater has got to happen. within the resources that we've got available. Now, unfortunately, what the pilot showed was that not enough difference had been made to the patterns of travel for the investment that was required, and we would need to find £40 million to continue with that exercise. Now, I've gone through with Parliament on a number of occasions, and indeed the Finance Secretary did this a few weeks ago, the enormous challenges we're facing in the public finances. And however much we would wish to do take forward the peak fares pilot into implementation, we simply don't have the resources to enable that to be the case for the scale of impact that the pilot identified. We have put in place other measures to discount fares to encourage more travel by train, and we'll continue with those measures.
Ms. Slater.
The First Minister is in luck because I have a suggestion for how he could raise that money. Oxfam has reported that £21.5 million a year, that's enough to abolish peak fares for good, could be raised through a tax on private jets, assuming it was embedded in the air departure tax, legislation that this Parliament passed 7 years ago but hasn't acted on. Now, we all understand the need to ensure an exemption to air departure tax for our island communities. Will the First Minister work with the UK Government to urgently introduce this tax so that commuters can once again have fair prices on our trains?
First Minister.
Well, I think that's a very interesting and welcome suggestion that Lorna Slater makes. She's provided a complete explanation of the point because she recognises, as I do, the importance of securing an exemption for the Highlands and Islands from air departure tax, so I'm glad that there's a point of agreement there on that point. And as for taxing private jets, I'd be very much in the spirit of doing that. As Lorna Slater will realise, as will all members of Parliament realise, we have to agree on the terms of a budget. So the Finance Secretary and I will be certainly happy to engage with all willing partners around the Parliament on agreeing budget measures, and that includes my friends in the Green Party, it includes my friends in all parts of the parliamentary chamber, as we secure common ground, and in the spirit of collaboration, for which I am absolutely renowned. In the spirit of collaboration for which I am renowned, I will happily take forward these issues with the United Kingdom Government, with whom I am enjoying such collaborative and cooperative discussions just now, but they could go further in some other questions.
Question number 4, Emma Roddick.
To ask the First Minister what discussions the Scottish Government is having with energy companies regarding a possible social tariff to reduce bills for low-income households.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has engaged with energy suppliers over recent weeks on the options available to reduce bills for households across Scotland. We are now establishing a working group to co-design a social tariff mechanism that would secure cross-sector support and demonstrate the viability and positive outcomes of the policy to the United Kingdom Government. The Government will consider eligible fuel types, consumer eligibility, regulatory environment, funding and delivery.
Emma Roddick.
I thank the First Minister for that answer. Despite Labour's pre-election promises, household energy prices are set to rise by £149 in October, and 860,000 Scottish pensioners are to lose out on the winter fuel payment. So it is vital that the Scottish Government works on a social tariff to produce a fairer pricing model. Does the First Minister agree with me that these decisions from Westminster will disproportionately affect people living in Scotland, and in particular the Highlands and Islands, where the winters are much colder, and has he raised this with the UK Government?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, these are very serious issues that Emma Roddick raises, especially on behalf of her constituents in the Highlands and Islands, where, as she correctly indicates, the hardship of the decisions by the United Kingdom Government to end the universal winter fuel payments will have a particularly acute effect because of the differential temperatures that habitually exist in the Highlands and Islands. So I do recognise these issues, and these points have been raised by the Government with the United Kingdom Government, because, as Emma Roddick will know, this issue was essentially landed on the Scottish Government, along with a budget cut of £160 million. The work that we're undertaking on the co-design of a social tariff has been taken forward by the Minister for Climate Action, Dr Allen, and we're engaging with relevant parties on that question. Obviously, this is an issue which it requires United Kingdom Government agreement and engagement, and we will pursue that as a consequence of these discussions.
Paul O'Kane.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This is an undoubtedly important issue. I'm sure after 17 years, another working group will be, of course, widely welcomed. But I think it's clear that making work pay and accelerating the just transition are also vital components in reducing bills. And to do that, significant investment in renewables needs to come from the whole of the UK working together. And GB Energy, headquartered in Aberdeen, will play a crucial role in bringing down bills and delivering energy security. SNP MPs failed to vote for GB Energy recently. So will the First Minister confirm that a publicly owned energy generation company based in Aberdeen does have the support of this government, and what work is he doing in that renewed constructive relationship with UK ministers in order to move these issues forward?
First Minister.
I could almost have suggested that Mr O'Kane is a planted question to allow me to talk of the virtues of my collaboration with the United Kingdom Government, which I will happily do so. Last Thursday evening, I had the pleasure and the generosity of time given to me by the chair of GB Energy, Jürgen Meyer, who came to meet me on Thursday evening with the Climate Change Secretary, Net Zero Secretary, I should say. We spent several hours discussing the plans of GB Energy, and Jürgen Meyer came to the Scottish Energy Advisory Board, which I chair with Principal Sir Jim MacDonald of the University of Strathclyde on Friday morning to further discuss the issues with a much wider range of stakeholders. The one thing I'm absolutely certain about is that GB Energy is not going to be an energy generation company anytime soon. I'm absolutely convinced of that. It might be a helpful vehicle in arranging and collaborating on investment proposals, and we will happily engage on that. But I really don't think Mr O'Kane can sustain the line of argument that GB Energy is going to be an energy generator, because it ain't going to be that anytime soon. We will work with GB Energy. We've had constructive discussions. We've got a lot of projects that are already in the pipeline. We're supporting them with investment from the Scottish National Investment Bank. If there's other investment support from GB Energy or the National Wealth Fund, we will welcome that, and we will work collaboratively to produce a good outcome for Scotland.
Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I was listening to the interaction between Emma Roddick and the First Minister there around energy bills and raising of energy bills. And it strikes me that we could get agreement across this chamber. There are those in our communities who are housebound, potentially with disabilities, who have high levels of energy use. Potentially, First Minister, aren't those the first people we should be supporting?
First Minister.
I think Mr Whittle raises a really important issue, because he highlights the fact that there will be individuals who are not on particularly high incomes that are just above the pension credit threshold, which is not a very high income. Somebody on an income of about £12,000, if my memory serves me right, will be above the pension credit threshold and could be in the situation that Mr Whittle raises of having very high energy use because of their physical condition or their needs, and they will not be eligible for a winter fuel payment. That's why the universality has been important to date. So I'm sympathetic to exploring what more we can do to help individuals, but I'm sure Mr Whittle will understand the difficulty I face, that we have had an abrupt removal of £160 million from our public finances, which prevent us from delivering a universal benefit, much as I would like to do so.
Question number 5, Pam Gossel.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister whether the Scottish Government plans to embed domestic abuse experts in 999 control rooms, similar to plans announced by the UK Government for England and Wales.
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, Police Scotland's contact assessment model already ensures that people receive the support and safeguarding they need in a timely fashion when they are in contact with control rooms. This is primarily an operational matter for Police Scotland, but we will be interested in how the pilot proposals develop and will want to see the outcomes and benefits that this would bring to victims of domestic abuse, which is of paramount importance to us.
Gossel.
I thank the First Minister for that response. Police Scotland responds to domestic abuse calls every 9 minutes. That's every 9 minutes a potential victim is in need of urgent assistance. It is worth examining if domestic abuse experts in 999 control rooms would make a difference. But I have also put forward proposals in my United Against Violence paper to expand training so that all frontline public sector workers can understand and spot the warning signs of domestic abuse. Will the First Minister consider introducing such a scheme like that?
First Minister.
I know that the Justice Secretary met with Pam Gosal on this and other questions yesterday, and I'm very interested in the proposals that she brings forward. I think we need to do all that we possibly can do to ensure that those who experience domestic abuse are able to receive the support that they require. It should be stated that domestic violence should not be happening in any circumstance whatsoever, but where it happens, we should provide the support. So I'm open to discussing the issues that Pam Gosal puts to me today.
Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the legislative proposals within the Criminal Justice Modernisation and Abusive Domestic Behaviour Reviews Bill published yesterday that can help prevent domestic violence. But would the First Minister agree with me that it's only by changing social attitudes and specific behaviours of those that perpetrate domestic violence, the vast majority of whom are men, that we can truly see a difference in reducing domestic and gender-based violence?
Minister.
I agree with Rona Mackay. Those who perpetrate violence and abuse, the majority of whom are men, must change their actions and behaviour, and we must root out and tackle the culture, the toxic masculinity culture and gender inequality that leads to violence, harassment, misogyny and abuse against women. We should stand against it and we should call it out wherever we see it. Our Equally Safe strategy is aimed at preventing and eradicating violence against women and girls, and the legislative proposals in the Criminal Justice Modernisation and Abusive Domestic Behaviour Review bills are designed to help us in that process. But I'm also very keen to make sure that we work across this chamber to capture some of the thinking that Pam Gosal has put to me to make sure that we do everything we can to address this scourge in our society.
Question number 6, Pauline McNeill.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's response is to reports regarding the number of young people aged 11 to 14 who are involved in violent crime.
First Minister.
President Officer, the Government is concerned that any increase in violent behaviour involving young people, particularly after so many years of decline. Since 2006-07, we've seen a 74% reduction in the number of children referred to the Children's Reporter on offence grounds. And more generally for adults, we've seen non-sexual violent crime falling by 58% since 2008-09, according to the last Scottish Crime and Justice Survey. Our violence prevention framework is delivering a number of key actions for young people, including the recent Quit Fighting for Likes campaign to prevent the filming and sharing of violent incidents on social media.
Pauline McNeill.
Police Scotland data indicates that almost 14,000 violent crimes were committed by children in 23-24. But worryingly, there is a sharp rise in this age group, 11 to 14, armed with weapons such as knives, blunt objects and bottles. And knives were the most common weapon used or present. Concerningly, the Chief Constable told the Criminal Justice Committee last week that the number of assaults on police officers by under-18s is on the increase. So, does the First Minister firstly acknowledge that cuts to youth services could have made this problem worse? I mean, the lack of availability on data has been criticised by YouthLink and other organisations. So I'd like to ask the First Minister, what exactly are they doing to engage with this age group, given the severity of these crimes? Because in the face of it, it doesn't appear you're doing much at all.
First Minister.
So there's a number of steps that are taken by the Government. Indeed, we've invested more than £4 million in the last 2 years to implement the actions that are set out in the Violence Prevention Framework. We work with a range of partners, including YouthLink Scotland that Pauline McNeill referred to, who deliver our national No Knives, Better Lives programme. We also work with the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit, who've got a formidable track record on the tackling of knife crime and violent crime, and Medics Against Violence. But I don't say any of that to in any way suggest that there is not a serious issue that has to be confronted here. There's a range of measures the Government can take. We can obviously work with partners. I met over the summer with a brave young person who has been very much involved in the Daily Records campaign our kids, our future, and I warmly commend that young person and the Daily Record for the work that they have brought forward. I committed in that conversation to draw together representatives of all political parties to reflect on what more we could do to tackle this issue, and that's an issue that will be taken forward. And knowing the deep interest that Polly McNeill has in this subject, I would welcome her participation in that cross-party summit.
Thank you. We will move to constituency and general supplementaries, and I call Emma Harper.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This week is Organ Donation Week, and it's an opportunity to encourage people across Scotland to make their organ donation wishes known and explain the importance of sharing a person's organ donation decision with loved ones so that choice can be honoured. I say this as a former liver transplant team nurse. Could the First Minister provide an update on what action the Scottish Government is taking to promote the importance of organ donation and the importance of people making their wishes known?
First Minister.
President Officer, we have a range of awareness campaigns that are in place to encourage individuals to take the steps that Emma Harper has set out. This is important life-saving activity that can involve us all, and I would use this opportunity at question time to make it clear the Government's support for the aspirations set out in Emma Harper's question.
Alexander Stewart.
To ask the First Minister what the Scottish Government's reaction is to the findings of the New Health Organisation study, which found Scottish 13-year-old girls displaying addictive behaviours towards social media and boys the same age showing the highest levels of daily gaming. And how does it plan to manage this potentially dangerous and damaging behaviour?
First Minister.
I think this is a serious issue, and as the father of a 13-year-old, I wrestle with these challenges on a constant basis. So I say that in all seriousness about the degree of focus there is on social media amongst young people. We've got to encourage young people to see social media activity in perspective in the rest of their activities. So encouraging healthy, active lifestyles is important too. Next week is Women and Girls in Sport Week, and the Government is engaged in a lot of promotional work to encourage more participation and engagement in sporting activity by women and girls. Indeed, I'll be visiting Perth College UHI in Perth City to support some of this work next week. So I think we've got to encourage awareness raising of the dangers of social media and its overuse. Parliament has already discussed some of the very acute dangers in the question that was put to me by Evelyn Tweed some months ago about the tragic case in Dunblane. And we have to make sure that there is wide understanding of the difficulties and the challenges that can arise from overuse of social media.
Jackie Bailey.
I've been contacted by Alan Ronald, who is a type 1 diabetic. Last month, he visited more than 6 different pharmacies before eventually getting insulin in Glasgow. Yesterday, he was told at his diabetic clinic that there are only 4 vials left in Glasgow, so you can imagine his distress. Can the First Minister advise what urgent steps are being taken to address this acute shortage of insulin?
First Minister.
This is a very important issue, and I recognise the importance of individuals being able to have access to insulin supplies. Procurement is undertaken on a United Kingdom-wide basis. I'm not familiar with the challenges that Jackie Bailey puts to me about supply and circulation. I will look into that in the aftermath of First Minister's question time, because it's critical that individuals who rely upon that supply are able to obtain it. And I'll write to Jackie Bailey with an update later today.
Adam.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister, in light of this being International Week of Deaf People, how the Scottish Government is ensuring that Scotland is the best place for deaf people to live, work, learn and visit.
First Minister.
Well, first of all, I want to start by commending my friend and colleague Karen Adam for the tremendous leadership she offers in this area of policy. She's a champion of the deaf community and raises these issues assiduously. Our efforts are underpinned by our See Here strategy that was a product of partnership working with local authorities, health boards and the third sector. See Here funding is used through localised sensory support partnerships, which include the third sector, to help put supports in place for deaf people. And I commend their activity, and I commend Karen Adam for the leadership that she shows on this matter.
Finlay Carson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In a response to my letter to the Prime Minister, I understand that the Department of Transport are still in discussions with His Majesty's Treasury regarding the £8 million committed by the former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to fund a study on the A75. I'm also aware that the Secretary for State for Transport has met with the Cabinet Secretary to discuss shared transport priorities. Will the First Minister update members on any progress being made and confirm his commitment to working with the UK Government to deliver the much-needed bypasses for Crocketford and Springholme? And will the First Minister also agree to meet with me and the South West Scotland Transport Alliance to consider their calls to form a task force to deliver these urgent improvements?
First Minister.
Presiding Officer, let me say that, first of all, that we will engage constructively with the United Kingdom Government on this question. I know the importance of the issue to Mr Carson and his constituents, so we will engage constructively on that basis. I'd be very happy to meet with Mr Carson and his local campaigners to discuss the improvements to the A75 and to take forward that dialogue. Indeed, it might be beneficial if I came down to Galloway to have that conversation to do so. And finally, Presiding Officer, I am aware of there being quite a bit of uncertainty about the funding for particular projects that many of us believed were in the course of being delivered because of the upcoming budget process and the spending review. And indeed, there are a number of projects that I'm aware of where the United Kingdom Government is not at this stage able to make the to honour the commitments that had been previously given by the previous government. So we'll obviously, and obviously Mr Carson will appreciate that's not an issue under my control, but I will engage constructively, as I know the Finance Secretary is doing so, with the Treasury on these points, and we can perhaps discuss some of these when I meet with Mr Carson and his constituents.
And Macpherson.
Presiding Officer, I am aware that the latest recently published Global Financial Centres Index has recognised that Edinburgh continues to further its standing as one of the world's leading financial centres. This is good news for all of Scotland, as is Glasgow's success in climbing up through the rankings as well. Therefore, can I ask the First Minister to provide an update on how Scottish Government initiatives are supporting financial services in Scotland to thrive and develop, creating new opportunities, well-paid jobs and sustainable growth?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, there is a formidable amount of work going on in this area, and just the other day, on Tuesday evening, I had the pleasure to address the Ethical Finance Global Summit dinner, which took place in Edinburgh, where there was a very extensive range of investors who had come to Scotland for a three-day summit on green ethical investments, and it was a tremendous showcase opportunity for the Government to engage with. The Deputy First Minister launched and responded to the report of the Scottish Task Force for Green and Sustainable Financial Services on Wednesday, and the Minister for Business opened the new FinTech wing at the Edinburgh Futures Institute and marked the launch of the FinTech Scotland Festival. Now, I cite all of that activity because it's indicative of the energy that the Government is putting into securing investment. And the Green Ethical Finance Initiative has been an initiative which has been many years in the gestation, but we are now beginning to see the fruits of that activity as a consequence of the sustained focus and leadership of ministers in this Government. So I'm delighted to see the progress that's been made. The transformation in position for Glasgow in the rankings has been significant, also for Edinburgh, and it demonstrates the strength of the Scottish financial services sector, of which we should be enormously proud.
And Faisal Chowdhury.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Following warning, Scotland faces a cultural recession. It was reported that Creative Scotland and the Scottish Government were in talks over the immediate future of arts organisations. With decisions on multi-year funding only weeks away, will the First Minister reassure arts organisations and confirm where funding for Creative Scotland to make these long-term decisions will be released and how large their budget will be?
First Minister.
I'm enormously sympathetic to financial support for the artistic and cultural sector in Scotland. It is absolutely fundamental that we have stable and supportive financial arrangements in place for the sector. The operational challenge that we have, of course, is that the Scottish Government does not know what its budget is going to be for the next financial year. That is a decision which will be influenced significantly by the Chancellor's budget on the 30th of October. So what the Government has got to wrestle with is the challenge of providing assurance when it itself does not have assurance from the United Kingdom Government. Now, that's nobody's fault. That's just timing. But the one thing I want to say absolutely crystal clear to Parliament today is that the Scottish Government will support the cultural sector to fulfil its potential in Scotland. It is part of our essential identity as a country. The Government will stand behind the sector, and we simply have to make sure we have the practical assurance in place to make sure we can give the financial commitments that Mr Chowdhury seeks from me today, and which I quite understand the cultural sector require to hear from us. But we are focusing very much on that question, and the Culture Secretary, Angus Robertson, is engaged in discussions with Creative Scotland on the best way to navigate our way through those challenges.
Thank you. Point of order, Douglas Ross.
I'm grateful, Presiding Officer. In his response to me, the First Minister wanted to put on record, and I use his words, levels of crime in Scotland are currently at 40-year lows. But we already have a record. It's the Scottish Government's own statistics published this summer that said crime in Scotland from 2022 to 2023 to 23-24 rose by 4%. So how could the crime levels be at their lowest level for 40 years when the Scottish Government's own figures say they have increased?
Mr Ross, if I might stop you there, you will be aware that points of order are to be used to address whether proper procedures are or have been followed. And they are not to continue debates. They are not to question whether... the member will be aware that there is a mechanism to address inaccurate comments. So I'm very interested to understand what the point of order is.
Therefore, can I ask you, Presiding Officer, if, given the Justice Secretary has been sat next to the First Minister today and the First Minister had this information available, what remedies does the First Minister have at his disposal to update Parliament if he has deliberately or inadvertently misled Parliament on this important issue?
I would simply repeat again that points of order refer to whether proper procedures have been followed. The content of members' contributions is a matter for members, and members will be aware of the mechanism that exists to address any inaccuracies. First Minister's questions is concluded. The next item of business is a members' business debate in the name of Rona Mackay, and there will now be a short suspension to allow the chamber and gallery to clear.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Lewis McGlynn.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Saoirse Healy.
Hello and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. My name is Donald C. Stewart. Broadcasting Scotland is Scotland's independent broadcaster, providing factual news, reporting on the issues important to the people of Scotland.
We are committed to public service broadcasting, and with your support, we will produce even more programmes.
Provide opportunities for young people interested in media production and broadcasting, and challenge preconceptions of what Scottish media looks like, amplifying Scotland's voice and reflecting its communities.
We can already deliver high-quality live news, and we will create the highest quality programmes for you to enjoy, but we can only do that with your support.
So please subscribe to and share our channel or donate to Broadcasting Scotland via the link in the description. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.